Good afternoon, Memorial Day weekend. You're watching Road Track Ralph and Morales, Texas Fishing, and you're about to watch the old bastard.
Hello and welcome to the Old Bastard Fishing Channel. I have the flu again, second time this year, so won't be able to get on the water and do any fishing, so I thought I'd do something a little different. A video where I just talk to the camera and offer some tips. And while I was fishing on Memorial Day, I saw a couple of parents with their kids out fishing, and clearly some of them were out there for the first time. So it kind of gave me this idea to do a video about fishing tips for when you go fishing with your kid for the very first time. It doesn't matter if they're really little big kids when you're taking fishing the first time, or when they're 10 or 11 or 12. There's certain things that I think are helpful to keep in mind while you're fishing. These are oftentimes things that I learned by doing it the wrong way with my own kids, and based on kind of my own experiences of fishing with my grandfather. So even though I don't have this as one of my numbered tips, one of the things that I would tell you is that there are a lot of YouTubers who fish with their kids, and if you don't already know about them, you might want to look them up. So one of those channels would be the Wyatt Life, which I'll put on a scroll down here at the bottom, the name of his channel, and I'll put the link in the description below. He has a really young son, and he fishes with him all the time, and they make great videos, and clearly he's done a good job of teaching his kid to fish. There's Sportsman 101. I just saw a video with him fishing with his young daughter, I think, for the very first time not long ago, and clearly he's got a good handle on how to do that. There's Fishing with Big D. His daughter's a little bit older, but there's some fishing videos where he fishes with her, and he films her fishing. He's obviously done a great job in getting his daughter to love the idea of fishing. There's also, Morales, Texas Fishing. His daughter, he calls the Black Drum Queen because she catches so many black drum. He clearly has inspired his child to have an enthusiasm for fishing, so you should look up his videos as well. Then there's For the KIDZ Fishing, and obviously from the name of that, his title, he takes his kids out fishing, and he has some good videos where he's fishing with his kids as well. And then the last one I want to mention specifically is Dewey Cash. Dewey Cash has a really great channel, and he oftentimes takes his son and his kids out fishing on the boat. They're a little bit older. I'd say they're around 10 or 12 years old, and so he does a really good job of kind of managing the parent fishing experience with enthusiastic kids really well. But check those channels out, and I hope you find the 9 tips I'm about to give you to be helpful. Okay, so tip number 9 is keep your tackle simple. If it's the first time you're taking your kid fishing, there's nothing wrong with the old red and white bobber and a hook and a worm and some split shots. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no reason to overcomplicate the experience. I don't think there's anything wrong when your kids are really small at all. As a matter of fact, it's almost the only way to do it. With the traditional kind of closed spinning reel like the Zebco that I learned to fish with when I was a kid, I think that's a great start for really small kids. They sell them in Avengers and Barbie and Dora the Explorer, and you can buy a really fun little rod for your kid like that, and it'll work just fine. If your kids are a little older when you go out fishing for the first time, or at some point in that part of fishing, I would definitely, and this is something I wish I'd done sooner with my own kids, switch them over to a traditional spinning rod. It's not that hard to teach them how to use a traditional spinning rod, and once they learn how to use that, they really have already graduated into the adult world of fishing. Okay, so tip number 8 is don't force it. Don't force your kids on their first time fishing to do things they don't want to do. Now, I know this would not be what my grandfather believed in when he took me fishing or things like that, but in all honesty, what you want from that first trip fishing is for them to want to go on the second trip fishing. So I would avoid doing anything that's going to make them have in any way remotely a bad experience going. So what I mean by don't force it, don't force them to base their own hook. Don't force them to touch the fish. Don't force them to touch the worm. Don't force them to keep fishing after they don't want to fish. You know, if what you want from that first trip fishing is for them to want to go on the second trip. And this is something where I think I made a mistake as a fishing father in not understanding, you know, what that goal was. So tip number 7 is to teach the basics, but don't be obsessed with your kid mastering any part of this. Now I know, obviously, if you're going fishing for the first time with a 4 or 5-year-old, you're probably not worried about them mastering casting or anything else like that. But not everybody goes fishing for the first time with their kid when they're that old. Some people don't go until later. And all I would say is, you know, teach them how to cast. Teach them how the rod and the reel works. Teach them what they're looking for. Teach them maybe where to cast. Talk about casting further or closer. If you're fishing with that red and white bobber, talk about what it looks like, you know, when your bait's on the bottom, the bobber's leaning over. What I would also say in this area is, if you have slightly older kids, you know, if your son or daughter is 7 or 8 years old and they want to try fishing with a crankbait or, you know, a spinnerbait, have something like that available and just let them throw it and reel it back in. I mean, they're going to have fun feeling like they're fishing on a slightly higher level anyway, and it doesn't matter really if they catch a fish in that circumstance anyway. If that's what they want to do, I would definitely have that available and teach them about that too. But again, don't get caught up in, hey, you have to do it this way, or hey, you're not doing it right. Okay, so tip number 6 is something I've talked about in other videos for other reasons, but I would definitely bend the barbs down on my hooks. And I think the risk of that barb is greater than the potential reward of having that barb on the hook. I took my son fishing, my son and I went fishing, and he got a treble hook through his finger. You know, we had to do the whole, since the barbs weren't pushed down, we had to do the whole push the hook through and cut it off, and he did a really good job. He was a lot tougher than I would have been. But I would bend those barbs down. Okay, so tip number 5 is to teach catch and release from the very beginning. Now, I'm certainly not saying you have to catch and release every single fish your entire life, and that catch and release is, you know, inherently better than keeping fish. But what I am saying is, if you teach your kid about catch and release from the beginning, it becomes a part of how they think about fishing. It won't prevent them from thinking, hey, let's go out and catch some crappie so we can have a fish fry, or hey, you know, let's take these catfish we caught back home so we can eat them. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, I think if you teach catch and release, you explain to kids, even little kids, why it's important that we put some fish back so there keep being more fish, then they'll be, you know, more willing to do that, and that catch and release will become an important part of how they think about fishing moving forward. Okay, my tip number 4 is to take snacks, games, chairs, pillows, blankets, more snacks, juice boxes, fruit punch, whatever it is that you know that kid likes to snack on, and whatever it is you know that kid likes to do sometimes when they're bored, take stuff like that with you, and you'll find that your fishing trip lasts longer, and you increase the chance your kid's going to catch a fish, and you increase the chance then that they're going to want to go back. Now, this could be controversial because in my own opinion, I don't know that I want my kid playing on a video game or their phone while we're out fishing. That's not while we're out there. But there are other things you can do. So you have to play that by ear, but I would definitely make sure I took snacks and drinks and a whole lot of that stuff. And not what my grandpa used to take. I don't know how your grandpa was like when we were fishing, but when I went fishing with my grandpa, all we had was Vienna sausages and olive loaf lunch meat on Roma meal bread with that chunky, weird Thousand Island sandwich spread stuff. Okay, tip number 3 is to prepare for a short trip. I mean mentally prepare for a short trip. Take stuff for a long trip, but in your mind, be ready for a short trip. They're going to make those casts, and they're going to get bored, and they're going to want to go. So go back to tip 4 and make sure you have stuff there. In your mind, know that there's from your kids' point of view, fishing is going to seem a lot worse if you make them stay a lot longer than they want to. I'm not saying you have to say, okay, we'll go the first time they say they're bored or they want to go. But what I am saying is, if you're 10 or 15 minutes into that trip, particularly with small kids, as your kids get older, of course, the time frame you can try to pressure them to stay, I think increases. But particularly with small kids, when you're in that 15 to 20 minute mark, that may be all you get on trip number one. Hopefully they catch a fish in that time period. You might be able to extend it to a half an hour, but they're not going to want to go back and fish again if what they remember is being hot or bored or thirsty, or you were saying we got to stay longer and they wanted to go. For kids, time passes a lot more slowly than it does for adults. Okay, tip number 2 is going to sound obvious, but I think sometimes as fishermen we don't think about it this way. But go where you know there are fish. Go where you almost always catch fish. Go where you know it's stocked. Go where you know the fish don't have a lot of options. This first trip you take with your kids fishing is not the time to explore a new place you've never been. In my opinion, it's not the time to, think about where you want to fish and what you want to catch. I'm going to talk about this in my next point here in a minute. But go where you know there are fish, because you want to increase your odds of your kids catching stuff, because catching fish is what makes fishing fun. And nothing's going to make fishing seem more fun than catching fish. So I would definitely go to that stocked pond in your neighborhood somewhere. If you know somebody who has a stocked pond on their land, where you know their fish, go there. Okay, so my number 1 tip is again about the mind frame I think you need to have when you're taking kids fishing for the first time, almost regardless of how old they are. And that mind frame needs to be that this trip is not about you. This trip is about the kids. So, one of the things I wished I'd done better as a father trying to get my kids into fishing was, I wish that when I'd gone with my kids, sometimes I wish that I hadn't even fished at all. Because I really like to fish, and if I go out and fish and my kids are there, I start thinking about myself in fishing instead of my kids in fishing. And what I want my kids to do is to love to fish. So you need to make the fishing trip about them, not about you catching fish, not about you fishing, not even about your expectations for how much they're going to love fishing. The chances are pretty high that first trip is not going to make them fall in love with the idea of fishing. You need to make sure that you're not taking your ideas, your expectations with you, and be open to the idea or the experience of your kids and what's going to make them happy and what's going to make it a valuable and rewarding trip for them and not for you. So I hope you found these tips helpful. If you have a comment, please leave that comment. If you disagree with something I said, I'm more than happy to hear what you have to say. You may be right. My ideas might be the wrong ideas, but please leave that below so we can have a discussion about this in the comment section as well. Thank you for watching.